Welcome to the Connected Teamwork Podcast by Growth Leaders Network. How do we learn to truly thrive together? How do we stay connected to our authentic selves, each other, and our purpose as a team, especially when challenged? How do we unlock the deeper levels of group intelligence? Enjoy this episode of the Connected Teamwork Podcast and learn practical tools to evolve the connectedness of your team to its next level.
Hello there. Thank you all for joining us. We're here live on the Connected Teamwork Podcast, September 25th. We've got a special edition today, being joined by Stephen Oommen, who is a friend of mine, also a managing director here at Microsoft. I've known him for some time, and yet we've never worked directly in the same org. We have collaborated on special projects. And Stephen is here today to talk to us and talk to the audience about creation and nurturing of connectedness within teams that he's been a part of and that he's led. Stephen, thanks for joining us today.
And I appreciate it. I know it's been a long time coming. We're very, very busy people, so it's sometimes hard to collaborate and get time together to work on things, but I definitely appreciate you having me.
Yeah, I had to make the excuse of scheduling a podcast to catch up with my friend here. So no, in all seriousness, really excited to see where this conversation goes today. And as usual, I'm also joined by my illustrious colleague, Hilke Faber. Hilke, how are you today?
I am really well, and I am delighted to play truth ball with the two of you today.
I love it.
Exciting. Yeah.
Outstanding stuff. And if you're joining us in the live chat, feel free to add comments, ask questions to Stephen or any of us, and we'll be happy to field those. So Stephen, let's just jump right in. You've obviously in your career, you've had the experience of working as a part of a lot of dynamic teams in and out of Microsoft. And I'm curious, share your experience, maybe your story, any background that you think would be helpful for our audience before we dive into leadership philosophy and principles.
Background is actually mainly, that's actually been my passion, the way that I think I'm just wired that way. Without draining a lot of time, I'll just say it was serendipitous that I got into and came to Microsoft. It was a very interesting story for another day. But I think those lessons of building something from the ground up has served me well internal to Microsoft and at other companies I've worked at as well. And I would tell you that the biggest thing that I found is that the older I get, the more experience I have. It is so true, and this doesn't sound cliche. It's you realize how little you know. And by golly, especially after a couple kids, you really, really realize how little you know.
I resemble that remark. I completely understand that, and I'd say I couldn't agree more. Especially with age and experience comes that knowledge of you have to embrace that lifelong learner mentality. And I also respect greatly the philosophy around building things from the foundation. I'm starting to work with a brand new team now, and really just diving in, understanding the players, understanding what matters to them, ensuring that you convey to them that you're there to support them, developing that rapport and being transparent and establishing trust. These are all key elements, building things from the ground up. Stephen, why don't you share some pivotal moments or experiences that you think have really shaped your leadership philosophy when it comes to building and nurturing connectedness in teams?
Yeah. I'll go back to this idea of not knowing anything, and I'll use the term failure. When I was starting several of my companies, I would tell you that the vast majority of most things that I have started were actually failures. And I remember somebody saying to me one time, and I don't know if it was a mentor, a motivational talk, or whatnot, but what was said is that when you build, specific to building a business, but I do think this is a principle in any point of your life, is in order to be a success, you only have to be a success one time. So in the conception of a business, right, I had failure, 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 failure. And then I had one big success and I parlayed that into multiple more successes. And I still had failures in between those. But the point is, I learned to not take certain things so seriously, and other things I knew what really mattered. And so when you think about building teams, thinking about connectedness, I think it also gave me quite a bit of empathy because I realized how dark some days can be. And you start to resonate with people and understand that, man, we all just have different days. And I think that word empathy would resonate with a lot of individuals. But it's through the eye of failure and lots of it that I think that I've learned the most.
I think that's exceptionally powerful. And I'd love to tap into Hilke's experience with failure as well and the impact that it's had on his philosophies around team connectedness. I think you can look it up. You can do an internet search and find anywhere from the missed shots of Michael Jordan to the political career of Abraham Lincoln and all of the failures that have transpired. But these are people that are considered great. Because they built that body of work, they learn from these experiences and failures. And frankly, most of the time, the value that I feel like I can bring to my team is that I've made a lot of those mistakes so that they don't have to. I can help them see around corners as a result of my experience. And that has been invaluable in imparting that with my team. Hilke, having read your book, Taming Your Crocodiles, I know you're very candid with your experiences and some of the missteps that you feel you've made and how it led you to where you are. What's been your experience with failure and how has that impacted your philosophies around team connectedness?
Well, first of all, I love that you're leading with this, Stephen. That's awesome to me. Like that, understanding what's really important, right? And failure is an interesting concept of the mind, right? What is failure? It is, basically something is not going the way I want it to go. And it may have implications, yeah. And part of it is, am I accepting those implications? And how much am I in resistance? You talked about the darker days, Stephen, right? Like who makes the days dark? It's me. Like it's me who makes the days dark because my mind comes up with, we call the crocodiles, with these images that are for our protection. Like it's for our ego protection. It's for our crocodiles working really hard to keep us protected. But by doing so, it over indexes, it exaggerates, right? So like we all know this, right? We have 14 pieces of feedback and one of them, 13 are great. And one of them is like, not sure about that, about you. What do we remember? The 14th one. Why? Because our mind over indexes. So this is about remembering and like what's truly important, what we are. I would go so far to say that we are already enough. Has to do with unconditional love and acceptance. Like we're not putting ourselves on a conditional path. We're saying, whatever happens, I'm with you. I've got you. I've got you.
I love that. And that actually, that goes perfectly into the next question. And it reminds me, Hilke, you said this eloquently. We're all going to fail. We're all going to have scenarios where the momentum isn't what we want. Things get stalled. We don't get the result that day, that week, that month, that quarter, that year. But I think that's what we all strive for as leaders is consistent, remarkable results. Keeping a steady hand on the wheel is so important. Stephen, I'd love to plug in and understand, some of the strategies or really tactics that you've leveraged to connect with and motivate your sales teams to achieve consistent, remarkable results.
Yeah, this one's going to be a little bit of a long-winded answer, so I will ask for a little bit of forgiveness because there's multiple components to this. And just, I'll just put it out there. None of this was prepped, none of this. So this is truly like just hitting my head and it's what's triggering different things. But I'll share with you, I'll back up to sort of my leadership philosophy of what I tell individuals is that my purpose or my leadership philosophy is to inspire people to create life and love. And I'm going to back up because where that came from, if most people understand any sort of modern psychology, what I understand and what I was taught is that if you take fear and you reduce it down to its basic elements, every person is afraid. If you break down why they do what they do, they're afraid of two very fundamental things. They're afraid of death, and they're afraid of not being loved, right? By our peers, because we need connection. And I think that's very relevant to this conversation. So I took the antithesis of that and I said, listen, instead of focusing on not dying, let's just figure out how do we live and how do we inspire and actually have a life while we're living, the time that we have, and how do we create love, right? And it's not the romantic love, it doesn't have to be that, it could be, but that's what I want to inspire people to do within any team environment, professional, personal, or whatnot. The context of where that came from is I read a book, and one of my most loved quotes, or my favorite quote of all time, is a quote that says, perfect love casts out fear. And so what I try to do with teams, and I think about remarkable results when it happens, because I will tell you, even in my current leadership capacity, I have failures, I have successes, and we don't always get it right. But my goal is, how do you love your people? How do you genuinely help them to come and bring their full skills, life, everything to the table, right? But here's where I really focus on, if you want to think about the tactical side of things. Whether I was an individual contributor or I'm a leader of people or a leader of leaders, here's what it always boils down to in my thought process. Control what you can control. That's number one. And so when I put together teams, that's actually what I measure, because I personally don't measure results. I do at the very end, but I'm a big leading indicator sort of manager / leader. Because if you do all of the right things, I, in my heart of heart, know the results will be where they are. And so then the third component of this is what I look at as, it is not, I do believe everything rises and falls on leadership. I actually do believe that. But I think one of the biggest things about great leadership, is great followership. You look at any athletic team, any corporate team, anywhere, you have great leaders because you also have great followers. And some people just aren't good followers. It just is what it is. And so that's why I go back to control what you can control, because when I lead people, I watch what they show up with. You can control your laziness, you can control your work ethic, you can control your skill or your knowledge and go get training, things of that nature. But at the end of the day, we also have people that have talents in certain areas. And so as a leader, you have to have that followership that recognizes, that's willing to be coached. And so I have struggled over the years, right? Because sometimes you are given a team, sometimes you are able to put a team together, and you have to, it's not always cupcakes and ding dongs, as I like to say, right? And so you have to have that two-way street. But I just don't believe that there's something as just great leadership. Great leadership recognizes great followership, or sometimes you have to switch out followership. And let me give you one last thing. Followership, in my definition, is not yes. That's not what great followership is. It doesn't mean it's somebody who agrees with what the leader says. Great followership means I want to be coached. I want to bring new perspectives. I want to be the best version of myself. And I will always be willing to take constructive criticism. I'm willing to get better each and every day. And there's no way on heck I'm going to believe that I know everything. That's great leadership and great followership when you believe that way.
Thank you for sharing that. I'm going to go to Hilke, and then we're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to dive into some actionable advice from Stephen and from his experiences. Through the ups and downs, connectedness doesn't happen overnight. So, talking to leaders as we are today, Stephen is going to give you some actionable tips and advice on how you can establish and also nurture and maintain connectedness, even in challenging situations. Hilke, when Stephen was talking just now, a lot of what he was saying really resonated too, as, a follower of yours, an avid fan of Taming Your Crocodiles. And, you do a lot of work in uncovering, being able to name, and ultimately neutralizing or leveraging the fears that we have that are innate. What were your thoughts about what Stephen shared?
Well, I love that distinction of leadership and followership are two sides of the same coin. And the question in my mind that I started playing with as it came up was, so what do we do as leaders when we notice not so great followership, right? And I love Stephen's core principles because that to me is the first place that I go to as a leader. It's like, okay, I see this is not happening the way I want. Like in a way, my followership is failing, right? So then the question is, where do I go? Where do I go first? And the first place I go to is first principles. Like, what do I stand for? So for Stephen, I love it's about light and love. For me, it's about truth, love, and service. Very, very similar, right? It's interesting. If we really look at it, our principles as human beings, not surprisingly, are very similar, like connecting to the same things. And when I go to these principles, when I see that, I connect to truth first. And what I do is I think about how do I create a context in which we can have a really honest conversation about what's going on, letting the other person know that it's safe, even though the consequences might be that we're no longer working together. But I need the other person to know that I see them. I see them as a human being beyond their behaviors or current conditioning or whatever is going on in their lives. That's the first thing and the last thing I need to communicate. And then everything in between fits.
Beautifully said. We're going to take a quick break and then we'll come right back.
You are listening to the Connected Teamwork podcast by Growth Leaders Network. Do you want to learn more about building the next level of connectedness in your team? Please contact Growth Leaders Network on LinkedIn. And now, back to the show.
Welcome back. All right. So on this show, we like to give actionable feedback and tips to the leaders that are listening and partaking in the show. And today is no different. So, Stephen, from your experience, you just alluded to this earlier, but I think this is very common where as leaders, we may inherit teams or we may be able to forge our team. But speaking to the leaders in the audience today, what are some actionable tips and strategies that you would recommend for building and nurturing connectedness with teams, whether it's a brand new team to them, or maybe it's a fork in the road where they realize that they need to do something to instill some connectedness and they need to get started?
Yeah, I'll share it in a couple different bullet points. I would say one, which it's interesting because I had a conversation with a couple previous employees who called me in the last week, interestingly enough. One of them, it was good to hear because she shared some feedback and it made me feel good. Okay, maybe I might be a decent leader after all. But one of the things that she said was, and it's my number one point, is have a very clear and consistent vision. And one of the things she gave me credit for, she said that when she had come onto my team, no matter who she went and asked on the team, everyone literally could parrot exactly what my vision was. So there was no mistaking what that is, right? Number two is be proactive and actually explicitly talk about connection, why it matters, and what that means, living in your purpose, living for each other, living for the mission that we're doing as a collective group, right? There's a lot of connectivity points even with your customers. But then the last one is, I think, super tactical that I think a lot of people miss, and it makes for uncomfortable conversations when they don't necessarily have to. And the only part of this you can control is yourself as a leader. And here's what it is when you look at individuals through the lens of their strengths, not through the lens of their results of what they're giving you. Every human being has some level of strength, and you feel sometimes disconnected when things are not going well. But what's interesting is when a rising tide raises all ships, right? Over the past year in technology, man, we got hit pretty hard, right? So it illuminates and you see all the different gaps and things of that nature. But the previous year, sometimes those gaps were hidden because everybody was just naturally winning. Well, my point is, it doesn't matter if you're winning or losing. Here's the truth of the matter. If you focus on people through their strengths, I am very proud of the fact that anybody that I have had a conversation with that I have moved off my team, I always looked at them and tried to help them find better things that was suited for their skills. I had open conversations. I just had another conversation with a previous employee, and we still have a great relationship. And I helped that person get to a different team, and so much happier now, doing extremely well. It wasn't always fun in the midst of, hey, this may not be the best position for you, but I think if someone can tell that you are really out to help them in their life, creates even more connectedness for you to them, and it actually spreads it throughout their next team and so forth, right? But when I think about what you asked about tactical advice, that third one especially is, you got to have those open conversations, and it's easier to have those what's perceived as uncomfortable conversations if you think ahead and say, here's where I think you would be really good. Let's have a dialogue. What do you think? Do you actually enjoy what you're doing in this role? So hopefully that gives a little bit of help and some tactical advice.
It does. And I think it's an important call out, because at the heart of what you articulated there is going back to one of the core fundamentals: control what you can control. And oftentimes, there's not a lot within our locus of control. So it's all the more important to understand what we can control and to control those things the best we can. But the other element is at the core of, you're an advocate for your people. And whether that's moving up in the organization, moving off the team to find their true calling, whatever it is, it's understanding their unique strengths and skill sets and superpowers, and how you can work with them in order to embellish those so that they can help elevate other people, whether it's here or somewhere else. And ideally, we get people to their proper destination. If it's promoted, if it's maximized paychecks, or if it's more projects or different projects, that's ultimately our goal. Hilke, I'd love to hear some actionable tactical advice from you as well for our leadership audience today, along these same themes.
Well, this is actionable, philosophical. Let's put it that way.
Beautiful.
I'm thinking about this as a leader is a carver of potential. When Michelangelo was asked, and I always share this quote, how did you make this beautiful statue that later was called to David? And you know what he said? He said, I saw an angel in the stone and I carved to set it free. That to me is the core of leadership. Like, I am here to say, yeah, I see you. And I also see you where you're getting in your own way, at least my perspective. Let's understand what's true about that, right? So going back to what Stephen said at the end, it's about having these very open conversations with this highest intention of, like, I am an advocate for your potential. Let's figure out what the angel is in you. Now, I might not use that word with everyone, because some people are like, nah, that's a weird word for me. I'm not talking about that. But what's your strength? What's essential about you? If you look back, person and that I'm talking to, in 30 years, when you're retired or we're walking on the beach somewhere, and you look back at this moment, how can we make sure that in this moment you make the choice that is in the highest benefit of all, including yourself?
I'm beginning work, as I mentioned, with a brand new team. And every time I start to work with new teams, I have a way that I kind of go about that, a strategy. One of the first things is leveraging a team survey so that I can really understand, what's the rhythm that they want to have with me? What's going to be most helpful? I never want to add calls or reports or work for work's sake. So the key is I want to almost ask permission in order to engage one-on-one. Do they want a weekly, a bi-weekly? I ask for their feedback on how our team meetings and our dialogue is going to be structured. I ask if there's anything in flight, for instance, with their career. If they have something that is top of mind, they're trying to get promoted, there's something that's important to them, I want to know what it is right out of the gate. And the reason why is because I never want them to feel like, oh, here's the new guy, I got to explain my story to them all over again. I want them to keep, the feeling that there's good, positive momentum and that I care about getting them where they're going. I also encourage my teams to have a players only rhythm, where they're meeting without me, where they're meeting without leadership, and they're able to talk, gel, share, and then someone is kind of an elected or appointed steward of that group that can give me candid feedback. And that's been exceptionally helpful for me to get constructive feedback from that group. I've found that I communicate sometimes too much, letting them know everything that I'm hearing from leadership and being able to make that more digestible for them has been a valuable learning for me throughout that process. But as a leader, we always want to be thinking about how we can best support, best lift up our team. Who are the people that we can introduce to our team that can serve them as mentors and sponsors, even when and if it's not us? What resources can we make available to them? I think it's really important as leaders, when we're building connectedness, to not just focus on the connectedness that we have with them, but also the connectedness that they have with each other and how they're lifting each other up with sharing best practices and sharing resources that they stumble upon. We have a segment on every team meeting that we do called "What Are You Learning?" And it's an opportunity to share with each other a podcast or a book they're reading or some resource that they might have stumbled upon in our business that can help their fellow colleagues. So all of those are very, very valuable. The last question I wanted to ask about, because connectedness isn't always, what is it, ho-hos and ding-dongs, Stephen? So when it doesn't come up ho-hos and ding-dongs, maybe you could share a challenging scenario or two that you've grappled with in building connectedness or keeping connectedness within your team. How did you and your team handle that? And anything that you think would be helpful for other leaders that are struggling with this today? Would love to hear.
Yeah, and I'd like to talk about a very real situation, which is geographical proximity. We're in a remote environment. A lot of companies have stopped travel. I know that for me, when I see my team, and sometimes you have a few that are local, it creates a different type of energy, right? But to your point, it's, are they still connecting with each other offline? Are we doing the team meetings? I would also tell you that, sometimes when you think about leadership versus followership, there are times where as a leader, you have to create the guardrails and still do things that, sometimes the followers don't want. It's just like driving in the road, man. I want to drive wherever I want. There's a reason that there's guardrails of where we can drive, right? So sometimes, for me, whether or not they want a team meeting or not, we're going to have a team meeting, because guess what? We know sometimes there has to be a little bit of that forced connectedness. I do make sure that I have to have one-on-ones with my people. Now, what they want to discuss or the time limit, maybe it's a 15-minute meeting, but sometimes you just have to have that to connect with them. But they do a players-only meeting as well. But I would tell you, for me, I have not figured this out. So I want people out there to realize, like, there's not this silver bullet about this idea about geographical proximity. I think it's like drops in a bucket. Sometimes it's bringing in new individuals, like, to speak to the team. So it's not just the mundane, right? So sometimes there's a little bit of variety that helps, juice up the morale a bit. But the truth of the matter is, we're in a very interesting time, and some people really like I'm in my own environment. And for a time, I was actually like that, because believe it or not, I'm an introvert. And so I liked being at home. But man, that only lasted a short amount of time, because I'm like, I need to see my people. I need to shake hands, hug, all that kind of stuff. So I would tell you that if there's a way to get your people together, there is something different around being together. And if you can't, then I would think about, how do you have this sort of remote environment create more fun and excitement? Don't make the meetings always about business. Like, sometimes you just need to get to know each other, because you're missing that physical proximity. So you can't have the like in a meeting. Sometimes there's people chattering in a meeting. That's actually more of a personal thing. Like, you get that connectedness. You don't get that in a remote meeting. So you have to proactively make it fun. And that would probably be one of the biggest pieces of tactical advice is, in remote meetings, don't make it always about business.
Thank you for that. We're going to move toward closure here and give opportunity for both Stephen and Hilka to give some closing thoughts. Stephen, we'll start with you.
Love your people, whatever that word means to you. Genuinely look out for their best interest, look out for everyone's best interest. And I'll just leave you guys with a quote that has always resonated with me. This one told me, leave people better than you found them. If you just do that, you'll do just fine.
That's powerful. Hilke, your thoughts on today's show, and any final thoughts for the audience?
What Stephen said, forced connectedness. It seems like such a thing that I don't want to do, but it is like running. Once I start running, it's like I'm over the hump. Like, yes, there it is. It's like take the time. Context goes before connectedness goes before context, and context goes before content. Over to you, Carson.
Very good. Thank you. And I'll just say this, the leader sets the tone for connectedness in the team, and there's a lot of responsibility to that. But the responsibility does not fall solely on the leader to create and nurture the connectedness. It's important that you're earning the right to have that connectedness within your team, and that you're looking for any and all ways to foster people working together and collaborating. I lead a team today, a handful of folks, but when we do our team meetings, we invite everyone that has a vested interest in this market to join, 80 plus people. And I solicit each and every one of them before our meetings to understand what do they want to see or cover, giving people the opportunity to have their voices heard, make sure that they're a part of, putting the boat together. Because if you do that, that's what ensures you have the best probability that everybody will be rowing in harmony. And that is something you can control, going back to controlling the controllables. So this was the Connected Teamwork Podcast. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next Monday. If you have interest in being on a future show, let one of us know. Definitely reach out. We're always looking for guests that want to share their story and how they create and nurture connectedness in their teams. And until next time, thank you for joining us. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Connected Teamwork Podcast by Growth Leaders Network. Take a moment to reflect on what you learned today that can help build your team. Also, if you like, think about one of your team members and what you appreciate about them. Let them know. Enjoy connecting more deeply to what is great about them. And see you next time at the Connected Teamwork Podcast.